All right, so this is a reread. I decided to reread Dune. I'm only going to be covering the first portion of the book here. It's divided into three books. If you look in the front, you have book one, which is titled Dune. Book two is Muad'Dib. And then the third section is titled The Prophet. So this is the Putnam edition that I got 30 years ago. I read this when I was a teenager, and I have not read it since. So this is the first time I've read this book in 30 years. So I'm kind of going into it fresh. Now, I was never real big on Dune. My first exposure to Dune was the David Lynch 1984 movie. When I was a kid, I think I saw it like on television. It was on a lot back in the 80s. And it was edited for broadcast, and it kind of creeped me out. Then when I was in the 7th grade, I got into a novels class, and we read a bunch of books in that class that were very interesting. I read Isaac Asimov's I, Robot, Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. I read the Martian Chronicles in that class. T.H. White's The Once and Future King, about King Arthur. We read The Outsiders. And one of the books we read for that class was Dune. And I remember that time it was a slog. I really didn't enjoy it. I think most of it went over my head. It had some interesting concepts, but it was just too much for me at the time. So rereading it now, older, I'm really appreciating it a lot more. It's got a lot of depth. Just having finished the first section, so that would be this here, about 208 pages into this edition of the novel. I'm going to try not to give spoilers for it in case you've never read it, but just some of the principal characters. So the setup, this is well into the future. I think it's like 1,000 years in the future, something like that. But I'm not like a Dune fanatic, so I don't know all the ins and outs. People are going to get on me for butchering the names and stuff. I just want to give kind of my initial thoughts, having finished reading this first section. The world building in this is spectacular. I really am quite impressed with the level of depth. There's not a lot of action. It's really dealing with a lot of politics and political maneuvering. It's almost like you have these rival houses. So there's this empire, and there's an emperor, Emperor Shaddam the Fourth. There are these noble houses of dukes and fiefdoms that rule over these planets. And you have basically the two principal houses so you have the emperor and his ruling whatever, where his seat of power, okay? And then you have the planet Caladan. Caladan is the home of Duke Leto Atreides and the House Atreides. And his son Paul is the main protagonist of the novel. There's a rival house that is known as the Harkonnens, and this is stuff I already knew. This is kind of like just kind of in the whatever you want to call it, the zeitgeist. Like everybody kind of knows this. Even if you really don't know anything about Dune, you probably pick that up and know just enough about that, just having never read it or ever watched anything. Enough people know about this book to get that much down. You also have a class, a religious class. They're almost like warrior nuns, and I would almost say that if you're familiar with Star Wars, they're like female Jedi almost, the Bene Gesserit. Paul's mother, Paul Atreides' mother, Jessica, is a member of this order. And it gets into some really strange concepts about the Bene Gesserit is working behind the scenes to manipulate bloodlines. It's really eugenics, like selective breeding to try to, breed some, I don't know what it is, genetic manipulation. It's very interesting. And there's these guilds. There's a guild called I can't remember what it's called, the Spacing Guild, which they have a monopoly on space travel. They're the only ones that can do it. And nobody really knows how. At least at this part in the book, I don't know how it's done. There was a war in the past which eliminated robotics, artificial intelligence, which this book was written in 1965 or published in 1965, which is just like, wow, this is really applicable to now with things like chat GPT and all this advent of AI and the dumbing down of people. There was a really interesting line, chapter 1 of this book. Oh, here's another thing. Each one of the chapters begins with an excerpt from a text. It kind of gives you a synopsis of what the chapter's about, but obviously it's religious text or writings of this planet Arrakis called Dune, which is the producer of the spice melange. It is, wow, check out that car. Sorry, I caught that on tape. But it's the spice. The spice is used for travel, and it's used by these people called mentats, which are basically human computers. They use the spice to boost their mental capacity or their mind powers or whatever it is that they're doing. They seem very much like master strategists, chess masters, essentially. These rival houses, they use their services. There's a corporation called the Chom Corporation that's essentially like has a monopoly on all the trading and everything. And the way that you rise up in these houses is to have stocks or stakes in the Chom Company, and Emperor Shaddam IV has the largest share of control. It's kind of like mafioso stuff. Like in order to get more shares, I guess you bump off rival families or rival houses through political treachery. So there's all these political machinations. And what's really interesting about it is in the first couple of chapters, we get the setup right away. You have House Atreides, who is being sent from planet Caladan, which is a water lush green planet. They're being sent to Arrakis, Dune. At the Emperor's order, he sent them there. The Harkonnens had been in control of Arrakis for 80 years. And they have spies that are there because these houses are rivals of each other. And chapter 1, we get introduced to Paul. We get introduced to Lady Jessica. We learn some of this weird religious undertones going on of political manipulation and the Bene Gesserit, these priestess women, they kind of work behind the scenes, controlling like a shadow government or something. All I want to say is I'm really finding this interesting. You get all this set up, the Baron Harkonnen, Vladimir Harkonnen's plans in the second chapter. He tells you exactly what his plan is and what he's going to do to try to undermine and take out the House Atreides. And the remainder of the book is us as the audience knowing what his plan is and seeing whether or not the Atreides are going to walk into the trap that he set. And it plays out. And by the end of page 208 here, at the end of the first section, we have all of these threads that were laid down in the first couple of chapters. They all start to play out very rapidly. Okay, so it's a slow burn. It starts very slow. And it kind of moves, and then all of a sudden, bam! Everything goes into it just starts to take off, and it just happens very rapidly. And on 208, at the end of this book, I'd have to say, the feeling of it is very much like the end of. I'm not making a direct comparison because obviously George Lucas ripped off a bunch of this. But it's very much reminds me of The Empire Strikes Back. By the end of this first section, the hero, Paul, is at his lowest point. All this stuff has just happened very rapidly. And you're like, oh man, what are they going to do? And it's very enthralling. And I can't wait to delve back into it. So I don't want to spoil too much, give it away, but I would highly recommend reading this. Now, I already know the book because I read it a long time ago, but revisiting it here now, things change when you grow up. And when I was a teenager, I just don't think that I was really able to grasp the concepts here. We have, the dangers of technology. We have that being explored with man having basically made AI illegal. That's why they use these mentats, is because they eschew artificial intelligence because of the dangers of it. And you have things in here like false flag attacks. That's used in espionage, if you don't know what a false flag attack is or a false flag, Google it. It's a real world thing. It's happening in this novel. You have eugenics and bloodline manipulations. You have propaganda corps is one of the things in here where the rival houses hire propagandists to put out propaganda to their citizenry to boost up their image or to influence the masses. So we're talking about mind control or manipulation through media, through propaganda. This book has got layers, man. One of my favorite television series, at least in the iterations of Star Trek, is Deep Space Nine, because it has depths that the other Star Trek series just don't have. It gets into the political intrigue and stuff. And this has got it. So I will say I'm really ready to dig in or delve into book number 2, Muad'Dib. And that's one of the things right now that I'll say. This book just drops you in. You feel like you're just dropped into the middle of the story, and it's kind of like drinking through a fire hose. You get a lot of terminology dumped on you at once. It's kind of a struggle at first to get into it because there's so much jargon being thrown at you, but it's the world building aspect of it. There is an appendices in the back. So this is very much like Tolkien with his Lord of the Rings. There is this whole universe that's being built up, and there are appendixes in the back of the book. And it talks about Appendix 1 is Dune's ecology, the planet Arrakis ecology. You have the religion of Dune in Appendix number 2, where you can read about the things like the Orange Catholic Bible, the B'nai Gesserit, space travel, the Butlerian Jihad, where they overthrew the God machines, their thinking machines. Very interesting stuff. Appendix 3, more on the Bene Gesserit, their motives and purposes. And then, of course, you have a glossary of title of the houses, the great houses. Leo Atreides, Lady Jessica, Vladimir Harkonnen. It goes into some of this stuff here. You have terminology of the Imperium, so the Imperial language. This is dealing with royal houses and stuff. It's very interesting. So it is a kind of a struggle at first, but you have these appendixes and a glossary of terms in the back to help you out. The Fremen, these are guys that live out in the desert of Dune. They are in touch with nature, where the sandworms live. And somehow the sandworms and the spice are connected. And the spice is like both a fuel, a psychotropic drug. It has addictive properties. It's just very, this book is just, it's dense. I know I could turn a lot of people off, but there are layers in here. It is well worth delving into. This is a fantastic piece of literature. I'm thoroughly enjoying it, and I'm glad that I picked it up and reread. I've had this copy sitting on my shelf for 30 years. I read it, like I said, when I was like 13, 14 years old, and I haven't read it since. So revisiting this has been a pleasure, and I am ready to delve into section 2. And I will have an update when I finish that second section, and that's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to break it up into parts, and I'll see if my opinion of it remains as high as it is right now. Currently, I would give this 5 stars out of 5 stars. We'll see if it dips down as I read the second and third sections, if my opinion remains the same. It's been so long that I've read this, it's almost like reading it for the first time. But my familiarity, having read it as a youth, a lot of the terminology I'm already familiar with because of my exposure to it in the past. It's funny how certain things come back to you. I know kind of the overall story and the pieces, the main plot points, but don't exactly remember how those things play out. So it's been a great read. Lots of interesting characters, lots of interesting characters in here. Duncan Idaho and Gurney Halleck. Gurney Halleck was played by Patrick Stewart in the David Lynch version, Captain Picard himself. So that David Lynch version, I remember being very weird. A lot of people hate it. I was fascinated by it. It's anyways, that's a whole other thing I won't go into right now. I know this is kind of rambly. I'm going to go ahead and end it. Thanks for watching. I hope that I don't know. I hope that you're doing well wherever you're at. And if you want to read along with me as we go through this, I'll probably post a video on the second section sometime next week. It took me about 4 or 5 days to read through this first part just because of busyness and stuff, but I'll try not to give away spoilers until I'll save that for the end. After I've finished the book, I'll do kind of my overall impression of it and a review proper for the novel. All right, thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day.